organizational change, facilitation, and the development of positive interdisciplinary team culture based on respecting the contribution of each role within the team. She's committed towards women's and birthing people's human rights in childbirth and the recognition of midwives' autonomy globally. We also have Dr. Cassandra Yuill, who is a medical anthropologist specializing in research on maternal health and maternity services in the UK. Her work particularly focuses on decision-making about health, informed choice, and the body. Her PhD explored decision-making about place of birth, drawing on ethnographic data collection in East London. She's currently undertaking research on induction of labor and midwifery units as a research fellow in the Center for Maternal and Child Health Research at City University of London. So welcome. Lucia and Cassandra are colleagues of mine at City University. So good to see people from home. And I'll turn it over to the two of you.
Great, thank you so much, Anna. And thank you everyone for having us today. We have some slides to share, so I think we just need, are we hosts? Can I share my screen?
Yes.
Great.
Let me see if I can make you co-host.
That would be great.
Do you have the slides, Cassandra?
I do have the slides, yeah. Hoping they work. I'm assuming they'll work.
Rolante, are you able to make Cassandra co-host? Because you're the host.
Great.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, this should be, oh, I always think, let me just move this over. Sorry, I'm getting it all into place. Okay, let's see. Oops. Sorry, I can't see anybody now. Right, great. Can everyone see that? Is that okay?
Yes, we can see the screen just fine.
Perfect. Okay. Get started then. So thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Anna. And as I said, thank you for having us. We had our own little introduction. I don't know, Lucia, if you want to go. But today we're, as our title says, we're doing speaking about re-envisioning maternity care and what can the biopsychosocial model of care offer. Okay. Lucia, I don't know if you want to go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Cassandra, and thank you so much, Anna. Yeah, I thought this little collage of pictures will provide maybe a maybe less, important introduction, and actually communicate a lot of the important aspects for us. I mean, in terms of my background, I think it's important for me to share that I come from quite a mixed background. My parents are Italian and Spanish, and I'm married to a Black British obstetrician. And I have a beautiful daughter who is here next to me today, listening. And also my experience as a midwife, as an anthropologist, is founded on really the basic of what it means to be a midwife with women. So that's how I'm coming to you here today to share and learn from everyone. Over to you, Cassandra.
And yes, I am Cassandra Yuill. I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland, but I am now based in the UK, and I'm a medical anthropologist by background. Anna did such a good job introducing me, so don't have too much to add. But I'm not a clinician by training, but I do work with a lot of midwives and service users, also, obstetricians and healthcare professionals throughout my work. My PhD my fieldwork was based in East London, doing research and volunteering within the community. with this organization called Social Action for Health. And I just continue to work with, some amazing colleagues at City, including Anna. So yeah, so without further ado, we will go ahead. So we have about an hour and a half. So what we're going to do is, Lucia, I'm going to first talk about this medical industrial model of care, Lucia, and then I'm going to hand over to Lucia to talk about the biopsychosocial model of care. We're going to do it's going to be about 30 minutes. Then we'll have a sort of, Q&A, and then we're going to put you into some breakout rooms for a group activity. And then we're going to have 20 minutes of feedback, and then we'll have a brief wrap up at the end. So I'm going to get going with that. Okay, so what is this medical industrial model? So this is sort of, first, before we go in with that, want to sort of talk about the underlying philosophy of labor and birth that sort of, is attached to these models. For the medical industrial philosophy, if some of you are aware or have come across it before, it's really, some of the sort of features around it, involve this mind-body separation, the control and management of people's bodies. Care is often, in this sort of assembly line. It's, has this lack of continuity. The environment, the importance of the environment is not necessarily considered. It's more peripheral. Birth and pregnancy and birth are very pathologized. It's a central institution, and it's really much characterized as well by risk avoidance and technology as the core, and particularly technology to, as part of as a solution for this risk avoidance. So the medical industrial model, so a model of care, hierarchical in nature, that draws from industrial processes. It prioritizes value, efficiency, and productivity. So one of these industrial processes that I think, is good to highlight is this example of lean thinking. So that emphasizes value, which is that products should be designed for and with customers. A value stream that each step in production must produce value for the customer, and eliminating all sources of waste. The concept of waste is also very far-reaching. It includes waiting, travel, inappropriate processing. And sort of that elimination is very key. As well, flow, so the system obviously must flow efficiently. Pull, so the process must also be flexible and geared to individual demands. And perfection, the aim is ultimately perfection. So what is this like within care? So Dennis Walsh wrote in 2006 about the organizational dimensions of different models of care, highlighting the use of Fordism and Taylorism in UK hospitals. And I forgot to mention today, we're going to be really focusing on the UK system as for our case studies. So that's where we're based, and we do a lot of our research. And also, so he looked at sort of these, this Fordism and Taylorism within these UK hospitals, but also as well how midwifery units or birth centers subvert this assembly line of care, which Lucia is going to talk a little bit more about in her section. So we found that both hospitals and car manufacturers arrange activity around dissembled stages and with clear demarcations for employees' roles as a car is birthed, following linear and discrete processes on an assembly line. So laboring women are processed through stages using a mechanistic model. Both have a time scale for completion of the product, and both are a highly sophisticated regulatory framework. And so others have written about this mechanistic model. Emily Martin, an anthropologist, wrote about it in 1987 in her book, Women in the Body, looking at this sort of this mechanical model of women's bodies and birth physiology. And so she sort of looked at this metaphor as the body as a machine, which she thought continues to dominate the medical practice in the 20th century, and I would argue as well the 21st century, that both underlines and accounts for our willingness to apply technology to birth and to intervene in the process. The woman's body is a machine, and the doctor is the mechanic and the technician who fixes it. Similarly, Robbie Davis Floyd, another anthropologist, has spoken about the technocratic model of care, and she highlights 12 different tenets within that, the use of technology to obviously, fix problems, but also at the end of it, the end goal being the production of the perfect baby. And as well in Van Tiling's, I think I pronounced his last name correctly, critique of the medical model. So this mechanistic model of women's bodies, and obviously birthing people as well, become viewed in as an object when it's sort of using this mechanistic terms. Birthing women are thus objects upon whom certain procedures must be done. Okay. So I'm going to go through a little bit of a case study about this in practice. What does this look like in practice? So I'm going to be talking about induction of labor, which is what part of my current research focuses on. I am part of a large research study called the CHOICE study. So I've been working on this study for over 2 years now, and it's all about a process evaluation of induction of labor, particularly cervical ripening. So we finished data collection and we're sort of halfway through analysis, but we haven't formally published on the data. So I'm going to be talking more about my reflections from field work and some of the things that have been coming out more broadly. And so for those who are healthcare professionals will know probably what induction of labor is, but essentially it is, starting labor artificially. If their cervix isn't quote favorable and they can't immediately have their membranes artificially ruptured, they have something called cervical ripening, which does make their cervix favorable. Usually if they don't go into labor spontaneously, then they have the ARM, the artificial rupture of membranes. And then usually people are put on a drip of synthetic oxytocin. So there are multiple stages within this process, as you can see from the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, or NICE. NICE's guideline, their sort of pathway for inducing labor and all of the stages. So we're going to sort of talk about those and some of the things around induction. So induction is prioritized on, part of it is, reducing risk. It's seen as, when pregnancy, that continuing pregnancy is risky for both the woman or birthing person and the baby. So it's obviously, there's a risk categorization within it. So people are either sort of put into these low risk or high risk categories. It sort of streamlines risk. Low risk is usually somebody who, has had an uncomplicated pregnancy and then it just has a prolonged pregnancy. And the high risk people are sort of everybody else, it's reduced fetal movements, fetal growth restrictions, small for gestational age, large for gestational age, being over 40, having too high of a BMI, sort of anything sort of, as that sort of very streamlined high risk category. And so sort of controlling risk is, controlling bodies within this sort of, streamlining too as well to make the care provision more efficient. And the induction of labor rate in the UK has increased steadily over the years. And currently we've had a staffing crisis. We had a staffing crisis even before COVID, but obviously with COVID, it's more important than ever to sort of streamline this process and make it more efficient. But an issue within this has also, and part of this risk categorization is sort of reproducing these harmful and erroneous stereotypes about people's bodies. The NICE guidelines for induction of labor were updated last year, and they released a draft guideline recommending that women and birthing people who are Black, Asian, minority ethnic family background, women with a BMI over 30, women and birthing people over 35 years of age or more, and those who've had assisted conception were deemed at higher risk and should be offered induction of labor at 39 weeks. And there was a large outcry about this that Donna referenced earlier. And there was a lot of outspoken sort of opposition to this, particularly led by Mars Lord. And so luckily this recommendation was not put into practice, but it showed, I've taken a little clip here at the bottom, this little screenshot about how, people were deemed not at a higher risk of something happening, but they were just called higher risk groups. And so the issues with that, the sort of, whose bodies are at fault and who's basically allowed to essentially carry a pregnancy to term. So what was sort of been, sort of reflections from doing this field work, and sort of you can see the sort of pathways and the way that this is sort of constructed within guidelines. We're doing a process evaluation, so we've been really looking at local policies as well. And this sort of these two policies, this sort of flow chart that I have here is not from many of the sites that we work with. It's just sort of one I pulled from another NHS site. But we've been hearing from healthcare professionals is you really need to use their services full capacity to maintain their flow, to ensure space is used efficiently, because they have so many people that they are inducing now, sort of avoiding the risk at any way that they possibly can. And sort of getting everybody onto the same model of care has been really important to reduce the chance of bottlenecks. So usually what's been happening is that people will come in for their cervical ripening and there'll be delays getting admitted onto the labor ward within the hospital. And so healthcare professionals are constantly trying to find strategies to sort of, ensure this process is, flows and ensure that, there's no bottlenecks, as it were. And so, what this is really interesting to me is that, women and birthing people are really absent, particularly from, these sort of flowcharts. When they really bring it down to the bare bones, people are reduced to, whether or not they're having contractions, their Bishop score, things like that. I also sort of note, within these different stages, the different time scales, the specific regulations. So, time 6 hours, Bishop score, 7, these different sort of, as Walsh was talking about, specific very standard regulations that you must, sort of have, or time scales you must be within to be able to progress to that next stage. And, but people are absent who are receiving the care are absent within this flow. And this reflects, what we found in our discourse. We did a critical discourse analysis of induction of labor policy and guidelines in the UK. And we found within this professional writing that, women and birthing people were really absent. They weren't active actors at all in care that they are essentially receiving, and that they are just essentially peripheral within this entire process of induction of labor. Okay. So what is the issue with the medical industrial model? I know we've been having lots of discussions about this. I know Donna really, was, discussing the sort of medical industrial complex. But, as a model, my colleagues, Laura and et al., Laura Battinelli et al. Released a systematic review looking at, what are some of the strategies in place for implementing, for instance, midwifery units and primary care. And we found that this, sort of this model is really a structural problem and an obstacle to implementation, particularly of midwifery units. It's a very hierarchical structure and creates really this division between models of care. Moreover, I would argue, and, echoing what Donna was saying earlier, that, this medical industrial model is a form of capitalism in care. It borrows from capitalist systems of production, which are racialized and gendered. And so, there's structural inequalities that are inherent within there. And so when you are applying them into your healthcare systems, those structural inequalities are reproduced. And I think we see this a lot with sort of the objectification and dehumanization as well of people, of women and birthing people. The reports of distress, trauma, obstetric violence from those receiving care, but also to highlight the sort of distress and trauma among staff too as well, because this model, I would also argue, is harmful for staff providing care who are expected to do more with less support. Part of the lean thinking is reducing waste, and that should, it's sort of a leaner model of, this production model, which you should have less staff, less labor, less people to, be part of that production process. And so people are expected to do more with less staff support. And then as well, I think, the harmful, implications of having this model of care is something we can see directly with, the maternal and infant health outcomes in the UK. As mentioned before, Black women are 4 times, and Asian and mixed ethnicity women are 2 times higher risk of dying in pregnancy than white women. And there's also a recent birth rights report that, discussed the the systemic racism within the NHS services, and really highlighting the fact that it's not, it's not broken bodies, not people's bodies that are, it's systemic racism within the system. And, they spoke a lot about, the lack of respect, empathy, the lack of basic dignity that Black, Brown, and mixed ethnicity people face and experience when they are accessing care in the UK and the maternity services in the UK. And also that, sort of puts a huge barrier for access for them too as well. So I know we've hit you with a lot of the negatives, but now we're going to sort of flip to the positives. And so I'm going to hand over to Lucia to discuss the next model of care.
Thank you.
Just let me know when you need to advance.
Oh, yes, thank you. Oh, who is advancing, Cassandra or Anna?
I'm advancing, yeah.
Okay, cool, right. Thank you so much, Cassandra. Amazing background, and now to move on, because it's important to understand the root causes of the current situation, but also great to explore and to have hope in our hearts and our minds in terms of some of the way forwards. And I know for sure, also from the work Jenny Joseph has done, and she's going to follow from our presentation, that a lot of the solution share a lot of the common foundation pillars. So would be great, I think, for everyone at the end to really think about what are the commonalities in all these solutions that we see, and there's slightly different shapes and forms, and particularly in different countries and health settings. I'll start from a couple of kind of zooming out 1 second before we zoom in back onto midwifery units in particular and the biopsychosocial model, to highlight how in this slide summarizes is just, calling for a reminder towards the fact that we have nowadays a huge wealth of evidence, policy, clinical guidelines, operational procedures. We are so lucky. When I first started getting into the world of midwifery in the late 90s, we really didn't have a lot of the evidence and the things, publications that we have nowadays. So we really know what works. We are just finding it difficult. We are heading, like against a wall every time we are trying to implement it. And one of our conclusions is that that structure of the medical industrial model of care and underlying philosophy is what basically makes it almost impossible to have change that is long lasting. Next slide, please. Oops. Right, so another couple of important concepts, optimal care and optimal birth, and I don't have time to go in depth, but optimal care is what as health professionals are responsible for. So in finding link to the previous slide, that paper from the Lancet, beyond too little too late and too much too soon, optimal care is in our field is the art of midwifery, balancing between not intervening when it's necessary, but also supporting physiology and really introducing timely interventions when there is a need for them, because there is a justification. And then optimal birth, which is defined by the birthing mother, the birthing person, and is not us deciding whether birth is optimal or not. And when previously, yes, there was a discussion about obstetric violence, this really recall for me, linked up the concept, because really, I think there would be a value in doing more work on creating kind of outcome measure for obstetric violence led by service users. I think that would be really fantastic. Next slide. A quick reminder when we talk about high quality care, and this is not, this is like kind of even within the medicalized setting, there is an acknowledgement of these three fundamental pillars of optimal clinical outcomes, positive experiences, and cost effectiveness. However, I put in brackets, these outcomes we're focusing on, they need to be short, medium, and long term. And very often in obstetrics, there is only a focus on the short-term outcomes. And a disregard in a way, yes, we do talk about experiences, but they're not really as important as the clinical outcomes. So really the top aspect in terms of actually having just a person that is alive at the end of the process of birth, and really we can do much better than that. We should know better nowadays, and the aspects of autonomy and respect are becoming a real issue. The cost effectiveness, given the fact that we had quite a good development of research in terms of demonstrating the cost effectiveness of midwifery, midwife-led service, continuity of care, midwifery units, is something that we need to become more familiar with to really use it to our advantage, because as we are still operating in a system where how much services cost is crucial, that can really pose an advantage for midwife-led services. Next slide. So linking back to the biopsychosocial, passing through the Lancet Midwifery series, and specifically here, you see the framework for quality maternal and newborn care. And the little bit I highlighted in light blue, that's really basically the remit of midwife-led services, which go from, describing what care providers should be, what care they should be providing, how they should be behaving, which values should underpin their practice, but also how care should be organized, as well as practice categories. So really, if we look at this framework, which is based on very good quality evidence, what this is telling us is that really midwifery should be offered to everyone. And then the little bit on top right, which is the kind of more obstetric-led services, should be just the add-on of specialized services when women and babies have complications. And if we think about where the investment is in maternity care right now, and how much we spend in what type of service, is pretty much the opposite. There is the most budget invested in acute high-risk services, and very little invested in primary care services. Next slide. So we are now coming back to the biopsychosocial philosophy of care, which underpins midwife-led service. And we see pretty much that the description, the pillars which underpins that philosophy are the opposite to what Cassandra has described previously. So we're talking about a holistic approach, a respect for the person, the focus on understanding what the individual person needs, is relationship-based, and looks after an environment which is peripheral in the community near where the woman lives, and supports physiology and the creation of health. So this is totally in line with the quality framework from the Lancet. Next slide. Yeah, and also links beautifully with some of the fantastic reports that we have seen published in the UK, starting from the Marmot report, which highlights how the kind of social and inequality aspects have a huge impact on the health of a population, to other research which highlights how really those social aspects and the social care aspects have a much stronger impact on the health outcomes compared to the input provided by medical care. And we see particularly in the UK currently, with the dismantling of social care, primary care services, we see, of course, under kind of Tory government, the funding of all that primary care and social care sector, and instead a focus on the acute settings. Next slide. So if we see what happened in the UK in the last 15 years or so, there has been this progressive move from community services to acute services. If we see in other aspects of primary care, for example, general practice, we see there is a push for going back to the concepts of continuity of care, which we are also seeing in midwifery. So far, basically failing, unfortunately, in its implementation because of that clash with the medical industrial model. So in general practice, we see this focus on creating relationships with the patients, having relationship and trust, being able to have a wait and see approach, et cetera, et cetera. So all aspects which we have heard and read in policy also around maternity care. Next slide. So really the point for us is to highlight how midwifery in general should be seen as a primary care profession, and these including the intrapartum aspect for women who are healthy and are eligible to give birth in midwife-led settings. Whereas, for example, we have seen this transition of all midwifery intrapartum care to become part of the acute settings, and therefore creating a huge problem because they are then competing with neonatal services and other acute settings services. And we see, as Cassandra has pointed out, the failure when we try, for example, to scale up and make midwifery units a normal primary care service. We are failing because the normal routine standard service is considered to be the obstetric unit, and midwifery units are only seen as an alternative, something that, you know, we'll have if we can afford to do so. But as soon as a pandemic hits, for example, we have the closure of midwifery units and the centralization of services in acute settings. So these really tell us about the fact that midwifery units have not been normalized. And this is because they are based on, and if you go to the next slide, Cassandra, as you can see here from the definition, not only midwifery unit is a specific defined space which provides maternity care to healthy women, but also needs to be based on a biopsychosocial philosophy of care. And this clashes directly with the philosophy, for example, of a labor ward, in which efficiency, getting the woman through the process as quickly as possible, is seen as crucial. So when we have a woman arriving in early labor who is going to, you know, we recommend her to stay at the birth center, that care we are providing, because that specific woman needs that care, even if in not established labor, it's seen as a waste of time, is not considered as good practice, for example. Let's move on. So midwifery units based on the biological, psychological, and social needs. Next slide. So we can see some example just to get you an idea. And the next one. So they can really vary in shape and form. This is a very home-like little private midwifery home in Genova. Actually belongs to my cousin there. And as you can see, is a very, very simple home-like environment. Next slide. And this is a little case study. Apologies for the Italian on the slide. I don't know how that came about, never mind. But the important thing is we kind of developed this project of this freestanding birth center in an inner part of London, which has a very, very diverse population. It was the first purpose-built midwifery unit, which means from the designing point, it was created to be a midwifery unit based on the biopsychosocial model of care. And this is one of the first and the few I have seen, which has been purposely designed to be that way. Next slide. So the environment is organized and set up in a way that, for example, when you walk in, the top right picture, for example, you walk in and there are sofas and little tables and chairs, and there is a mixture of service user and midwives and staff using the little tables. So there is this idea of that social space to make a welcoming environment for everyone. And there is a kitchen which is open to everyone to use. And if this is quite normal for small private maternity homes, for example, in the US, is quite unusual, for example, for midwifery units which are part of the National Health Service, because they tend to be much more medicalized and more like a hospital, if you wish. Next slide. Keep going. So just to have a little look around and keep going. And one of the highlights of this birth center, which I studied for my PhD, is also the fact that it was used by a very diverse population with a very fantastic ethnic mix and different birth origin of the mother. And this, is quite unusual for midwifery units, which are normally, the use is normally not really representative of the local population. So during my PhD, I did an ethnographic study, try to understand what the key characteristics of these birth centers were. If you go to the next slide, Cassandra, and this is a little model that came out from analyzing the interviews and participant observation and local documents. So really, relationship and trust were at the core of the well-functioning of the midwifery units. And this was developing relationship and trust between service users and the staff, but also within the staff of the birth center. And also key themes were ownership, autonomy, and continuous learning from the team of midwives, and also a great team spirit and a focus on the on non-hierarchical power relations. If you go to the next slide, I think I have a few little example of quotes. So in terms of relationship and trust, one of the midwives who arrived at the birth center said, "I found it more approachable. You come in the door and there is an area where staff sits and eats and talks, as well as the women and their families. That was quite great and interesting. And even when you come in, everyone greets each other. So lovely. And the women and midwives talking to the families and the women. They know the midwives and they have already built that relationship. I think it was great." So this was a midwife who got really surprised about this when she moved from the main hospital to the birth center. Next slide. Yep. And this woman, this service user, said, "I felt because she was there with me during labor, I felt like I could ask her for help. If it was any other midwife, I probably wouldn't have asked, to be honest. I probably would have just struggled along, sort of thing, because he wasn't feeding. He hadn't fed for quite a while. I don't know why. So I asked and she helped me. She stayed with me for a little bit and, told me that what to do and felt really reassuring." Yeah, so these are very, simple things of having built relationship, which destroys barriers and makes sure women can seek help and support when needed. Next slide. Yeah, and in terms of, this is another midwife who says, "We didn't have a manager at the beginning. Well, we had a labor manager, but she wasn't there. But in a way, it was good because we had the opportunity to manage the place and actually, there is some cut. They changed many of the guidelines and they tried to improve the birth center. It was our idea that they were going to be used." So the fact that there was a teamwork towards the continuous improvement of the birth center, and they felt really empowered towards that. Next slide. Yeah, and to conclude, already Cassandra mentioned about the importance of and the impact, for example, of alienation and stress in the obstetric unit and in the industrial model. And here was quite the opposite. There was a hint towards the fact that the staff well-being was being looked after. So this midwife said, "The birth center is a place where you can go into partnership with women to get the best outcome for women and actually the best outcome for the midwife as well. You understand, because when you are able to support a woman and the outcomes are fantastic, then you feel well in yourself as well. And the last one, you don't go home half as stressed. Oh, sorry, stressed. And the other thing is that we probably smile a lot, and we are a lot more welcoming. We are a lot more relaxed. Okay, go on. So really, all of these, you know, if we compare, oh, you can go to the next slide, Cassandra. If you compare what Cassandra has described with the very brief description of this birth center, and also in view of everything we know in terms of impact of midwife-led setting and midwifery, I would really recommend you all to have a look at this paper if you haven't seen it yet, because it's a really hard reflection on, we know midwifery is a vital solution, so what is holding back progress? And we know there are systemic discrimination and barriers at many different levels. And the struggle really is to understand how to tackle this. Next slide. And really, you know, we know what works, and we know quite well nowadays, and we really need to focus on those. I speak for myself as a midwife. I was trained to be a midwife to learn about how to look after women in labor and pregnancy. I never thought I had to really be able to influence, and, you know, is a lot to ask to midwives. But I feel, of course, there is no other alternative. We need to really gain that strategic understanding and become activists, and, you know, to really link up with people in politics, arts, activism, and everything else. Because unfortunately, that knowledge, that research is not having an impact per se because of these layers of barriers. So I'll hand over, I think, to Cassandra before we move on after the group work into our take from this reflection.
I'm muted. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Lucia. So we just wanted to situate this activity before we introduce it. So sort of drawing on abolitionist frameworks, you know, really focusing on, you know, building, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore has said before, you know, it's not about absence, it's about presence, and building these, you know, life-affirming institutions. And that's what we really want to focus on. You know, how do we build a maternity service? How would what would we do if we had a maternity service that's a life-affirming service? And sort of drawing from that sort of energy. And you know, we want this to be a collective practice. So as we're going to about probably five breakout rooms. I think there's sort of about 45 maybe-ish people. So we're going to put you into breakout rooms to do sort of, you know, collective creative process, and a reflection to, you know, as Davis and Mayers and Ritchie wrote recently, to sort of, you know, shape a new vision of safety, but also wanted to recognize that there are some contradictions within this, you know, and this sort of holding on to both and. So, you know, we do recognize that, you know, re-envisioning maternity services, you know, this sort of almost sort of, you know, reimagination, the sort of utopian view, you know, also needs to sit with the fact that we are working with these services. Maybe we're working within them as healthcare professionals, or working with them as researchers. And we sort of have to, you know, also, you know, work to create safety within these institutions at the moment. And so that sort of, you know, there is a contradiction within that. There's sort of a both and, but, you know, trying to use it as a spark for change. So I just wanted to situate that sort of, you know, where we're coming from, and, you know, how we're sort of approaching this. You know, it is supposed to be creative. It is supposed to be, you know, a re-envisioning. So, you know, it's sort of, you know, let yourselves, you know, go wild with your sort of, your thinking. So what we want to do is sort of, you know, based on what you've learned about the different models of care, and also reflecting on, you know, what everyone's been speaking about today in the summer school throughout the day, you know, what are some key characteristics of your ideal maternity care system, or your ideal maternity care service with your group. So we would want you to sort of, you know, write down a brief description, or have somebody write down, you know, or type some, whatever you want to, however you want to approach it, maybe select one or two people to present afterwards. So we're going to give you about 20 minutes. I I think, come back at 7:30 or 6:30 UK time. And then we'll probably have about, give each group around probably about 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes, depending on how much time we have left, to just present. And then we'll have a wrap up. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. Is everyone okay with that? I guess we'll make sure we want to open up for questions. I know it might be kind of running behind, but was there anything that we needed to clarify at all? I haven't been able to look at the chat, so I don't know what's in there, but yeah, if there's anything we can clarify before we get started, that's a good time.
Cassandra, is it possible to, or perhaps when people break out, so we're fine for time.
Yeah.
Rodante and I are keeping track of everything, so it's moving beautifully. Well done. If you don't mind just putting the topic, if it can be visible in the chat, or perhaps when people break up into groups, that might be easy for people to have that to look at when they're in their groups discussing things, if it's possible.
Okay, I've just put it in the chat.
Okay, great.
And then I'm not sure if I should do the breakout rooms or if someone else wants to, if Rodante, if you would like to.
Okay, maybe I'll see if I can.
I'll see if I can too. This is be a test of my technology prowess.
Let me see what I can. I've done this before.
Okay, good.
But let's see if it comes back to me.
There wasn't in the moment, if if we can answer any questions while we're sorting this out.
Yeah, do you want to focus on questions, Cassandra?
Sure.
And I can see about the breakout rooms.
Yeah.
Maybe Cassandra needs to. Sorry, not Cassandra, I mean Rodante.
So Lucia, there was a question in the chat about continuity of care. Okay, COC, so that's been answered. Was there any other questions? Okay.
Okay, I see Paloma. So Paloma says that when we go to the breakout rooms, the chat will clear. So if you just don't mind just talking us through again, what we should be discussing in the break room.
So want to focus on, and Lucia, please come in and clarify as well. Want to really, so that maybe I should share my screen again, because that may have been. Okay. So just sort of thinking about, I mean, in terms of characteristics, I mean, we were thinking, around 4 to 5, characteristics of, what would be part of your ideal system. And so, again, in the spirit of sort of, revisioning with the maternity services, I do realize I should, obviously I know a lot of us are coming from a lot of different places in the world, and obviously the contexts are different. So, obviously having a chat about that too as well, and maybe sort of recognize it, but sort of if you can, bring it down to, 4 or 5, but yeah, I would always love recognizing that, not all of the issues in all maternity services globally are exactly the same, and some local contexts, have different considerations than others. Lucia, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that's perfectly described.
Okay, I'm coming back. We're having a bit of technical difficulties with trying to get the breakout rooms before. I think we wanted to test this beforehand, but
hey, I'm really sorry. Okay. I don't know how to make breakout rooms. So if anyone knows how to do it, please let me know.
Yeah, so normally it should come out really in the screen, but I don't know if you need to make people hosts in order to do that. But
Lucia, shall I make you a host and then you can do it?
No, I cannot promise that I can, but I can try.
I've made you a co-host now. Maybe you can find the button. I cannot. I don't see
I
it.
can't see it either. I don't know if that's something that we're supposed to organize, but when you make the meeting, perhaps.
Ah,
But if not, maybe, I mean, we're quite a large group, but
Yeah.
do you think, I mean, perhaps if you need help, we can facilitate it as a group discussion with
Yeah, I don't see
everyone
the
together?
option. Normally it says, create breakout rooms, but
Yeah.
it doesn't look like is choose filters. It doesn't seem to give that option, I'm afraid.
maybe we can do it plenary because we're with 35 people now. Would it be possible, or would it be a pity?
I think, yeah, we could have an open discussion.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Thank you for being flexible, everyone.
I'm sorry about this. I thought that yeah, that we would know how to do it.
It's absolutely fine. Should I
It's
continue
usually
sharing
very obvious, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Should I continue sharing my screen, or should I just sort of, put it so we can all see each other?
Yeah, maybe let's look at faces and then
Lovely to see everybody in the chat too, as well. Okay.
Maybe it would be nice if people can turn on their cameras of everyone who wants to participate. I think not everyone is really maybe there. So everyone who would like to join in this exercise can turn their cameras on.
Good to see everyone.
Okay, Cassandra and Lucia, the floor is yours for facilitating.
Is if it helps warming up a bit by telling you some of the things we tried in the past which didn't work at all. So it's like fail and try again. But in the olden days when we were really kind of naive and younger, and we thought, well, actually, you could potentially influence the labor ward by going on the labor ward and doing implementation improvement projects about how to help people to understand and wanting to implement, for example, supporting more physiological birth. And then we saw that was not possible because the culture within the labor ward and the industrial medical philosophy underlying was so strong that it was very difficult to make an impact on those settings. That's when we moved out and really tried to implement that spirit and philosophy and practice within midwifery units, which works really well when you're able to start and influence a new birth center, a new midwifery unit. But then the problem is that the system is basically not allowing these midwifery units to become the norm, to be strong enough to have enough women to actually make an impact. So it's always a struggle to try to keep the birth center open, midwives get pulled, the birth center get closed. So this is just to give you a little bit of the a flavor. And at the moment, of course, I'm describing the dynamics within the specifically England, but many of the other UK countries as well, but particularly England. So in view of these and a little bit the discussion we had about the different underlying philosophies, what would be that, what do you think we should be doing in the UK? If we had a magic wand and we could transform the services, where would you start?
We've got two people, Claire and Michelle, with their hands up.
Amazing.
Would you like to jump in?
I think it was Claire and then Michelle.
Yeah, hi. I love this topic. It's my favorite topic. I think about it an awful lot. And I think about it from a perspective of Germany, where I live now, mostly because I'm a doula here and my interaction is a lot with women birthing in this system. And oh my goodness, it's so complex. We have a problem in Germany mostly that most of the antenatal care is taken care of by what here is called a Frauenarzt, but effectively an OBGYN. And so that's the sort of the standard entry point for a woman to come into the midwifery system, or for the beginning of her pregnancy. The first person that she will see is a physician, is a doctor. and they are very quickly sent down one channel, which ends inevitably in a hospital birth, almost always, within a system of, and then after many tests and interventions where they are often worried about their pregnancy because they're within a medical model from the beginning. The NHS has a different system because you interact with the midwife on the first, usually in your first interaction, which I think is better. But, pros and cons everywhere. There's many different thoughts about it. The problem, I think birthing people are pathologized from the very get-go. So they feel like a hospital is the safest environment for them, that it is the only environment. And so there is a perception that all birth takes place in a hospital. And I think that's mostly reinforced by physicians who have no experience of birth outside of a clinic. And I know it's reinforced by physicians who are having the first interactions with pregnant women who have never had any experience of birth outside a clinic. I think there is definitely space for physicians to learn more about birth outside a clinical setting. I also think that it would be wonderful for physicians, or to be encouraged either financially or through their insurance setups or through their gynecological societies to act at the peak, at the difficult end of their practice. I look at the gynecological conferences that happen, and I look at the program for a gynecological obstetric, I'm getting confused with English, an obstetric program, and some of the things that obstetricians are skilled at doing is incredible. They are incredibly highly skilled people, but they really shouldn't be taking blood pressure and weighing women at the beginning of their pregnancies, I feel. So that would be one great thing, I think, is to help women normalize pregnancy as not a medical condition. And I know I'm taking up a lot of time, so that's the one thing. But the other thing is, there is a model in Queensland, in Australia, where I'm from, where they are experiencing women moving away from who are increasingly birthing outside of the system, because what they're being offered in the system is doesn't fit what they want. They're had enough of coming in out the system like a cattle yard, being pushed through the system as you're describing, with the induction process and then churning through at like a number, and they're getting really sick of that. So but there comes a point where women who are wanting to go into something like a birth center, like you're talking about, that is has low medical, or no medical interaction, and is much more a physiological birth supporting environment. But if they have a small pathology, they are kicked out of that system. The boundaries within normal are so tight that if, for example, in my case, where I was 3 times in such a birth center, but my pregnancies happened to go for 42 weeks plus 1 day, I was no longer able to be serviced by those midwives. Their hands were tied. Everything they knew about my pregnancy and my baby, I'd had continuity of care. They knew nothing was pathological. There was no reason, but they were no longer able to help me. So I had no other choice. So women are deciding at that point to birth outside the system entirely. And that's happening. So what they've done in Queensland is introduce a guideline called Partnering with Women Who Decline Recommended Maternity Care. And they have a very good guideline. I'll post it in the chat to understand why women are turning down their care, so that they have a dialogue between the health system and the woman to understand her perspective, her personal feeling of risk, the action she's going to take regardless, and a commitment from the health services and structure to provide her healthcare at whatever point she needs it or wants it, and never ever to abandon her. My last pregnancy, I was told at 42 weeks plus 1 day, you can leave this hospital now, but you're not allowed to come back here. You can't come back here if you leave now. And that is coercive, frankly. I mean, not frankly, it is. It's in every way that you look at it. So when you have a guideline that says, that wouldn't ever offer a woman a threat like that, but to say you can go home now, and when you need us, we're here, if that's your decision. So that would be my thoughts. I have so many more, but I'm going to stop because I know it's not my show. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And can everyone see the whiteboard? I've started taking some notes. Comes out. Can everyone see that?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
you can
that's
see it.
amazing.
Yeah. Michelle, go ahead.
Hi, are you listening?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, sorry, my internet connection is not enough to support the video, but thank you so much for the beautiful debate. I'm a Chilean medical anthropologist working in Latin America in maternity care for more than 20 years. And what Claire said is what I wanted to say too, like we need to look at structural conditions that allow the possibility of birthing as women want, because what we have in many of the Latin American countries is a very coercive system that doesn't allow. For example, in Chile, we only have hospitalized birth, and there are no birth centers. They're not allowed. There is home birth, but out of the law, so it has to be paid by pocket, and it becomes a completely elite alternative. So many women are free birthing because there's not an option for humanized birth care outside of hospital, and we have hugely high, as you know, like a very medicalized systems with very high cesarean sections and obstetric violence, and many women are escaping, let's say, hospital because of all these elements. And not only that, but how the financial incentives for health teams are working, it incentivizes interventions, as you had commented earlier, like because of this chain of interventions and the fee that doctors get paid and institutions get paid, it becomes much more, it becomes an economic incentive to make more births the fastest possible. So women, even if they're said they will be supported in a vaginal birth, the room for the cesarean section is reserved as soon as they enter the institution. So it becomes like even if there are many midwives committed to doing physiological birth and accompanying women, the structure doesn't allow it, and they're very restricted to do so. So what we have been doing is pushing for policies to look at this kind of factors that allow environments where we can begin to talk about care, which I think is one of the important things we should be looking at. So I could talk as well a lot more, but I think that was my main point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Valeria, I see your hands up as well. So I'm just going down the line.
Sorry, Cassandra was saying something, and
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lucia.
No, because my microphone was off. Of course, I was like, I'm talking to myself. Michelle was saying, I really enjoyed your presentation with Yvonne Elsa, and it really resonated with so much of the work we're doing in the UK.
Oh, thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm from Mexico, and I have a little question. I'm a little confused. What is the difference about midwife and a doula? I think here in Mexico we don't know so much about these subjects, and I'm very interested in learn. Hope you can help me.
Oh, thank you so much. That's a very important question, and very, well, in a way difficult to answer. But basically, and who else can come in and help with this, Cassandra? And anyone else actually?
I'm neither a midwife nor a doula, so I feel.
I think,
No,
sorry, I can
that's super
I can
fast.
jump in to say,
Yeah.
and this is relating back to Dana Ann Davis's talk as well, because I think depending on the context, the lines can sometimes be very clear. Who is a doula and what is a doula and what is a midwife? Sometimes it's blurred. And I think that's kind of what Donna Ann Davis was talking about earlier today. And I guess we could probably talk specifically in a US UK context that and please midwives jump in and doulas jump in as well, that midwives tend to have more of a clinical role, tend to be kind of certified through the state, through institutions, and doulas offer more practical support in pregnancy, labor, and birth. But you're right that those, I mean, because we could have a whole discussion about what is a midwife, and we know that changes based on where you are. But particularly in the US and the UK, doulas offer more practical support. There is no kind of standardized training in the UK or in the US for doulas. And I think in both contexts, it would be illegal to call yourself a midwife if you don't have a particular training, a particular certification. And I'll let the other people add to that as well. I hope that provides some clarity.
Thank you.
Anyone else wants to share? I think, Anna, your definition was quite comprehensive and probably covers quite a few of the different aspects. So from my perspective, I don't know if there is another midwife on here who may want to share or add. But definitely, I mean, one aspect that I'd like to maybe highlight is the fact that, for example, for me, I'm a certified and registered midwife, but I would be not happy for my role to be defined just on the basis of the clinical aspects. For me, the midwife, I want to be is the midwife with woman. So that encompasses the building relationships and trust and creating, that support and looking after the woman through and the birthing person throughout the whole continuum of pregnancy, birth, and postnatal. So that is, for me, is important to say, because the way the role of the midwife has been cut and defined within let's say the NHS, for example, National Health Service, that's not what midwife should be. That's how a midwife in a medical industrial model of care has been defined, because only focused, we only give value to doing things and the clinical aspects, and the care aspect has been removed completely. So that is not what a midwife should be. That's an abomination of the midwives in an industrial medical model, if I can say. Thanks.
Hi, this is Susanna from Canada. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm a midwife from Peru, and I also practice in Canada. In both settings, as you said, midwives are mostly working as a healthcare provider, basically. So both are direct entry programs. So the difference between doulas and midwives are mostly that we are part of the health system, and we can consult or refer to obstetricians. We do also do the same role as doulas. We are with women. We provide all that holistic care. But the main difference, I would say, as Anna said, is like the clinical aspect with those liabilities that a healthcare provider has. Most of the time, doulas are there, but they do not make consultations with the obstetricians, or they do not perform clinical skills as vaginal exams, or sorry, my baby's crying in the background. Yeah, so I will just wanted to add that because I've seen that difference in between the two countries.
Thank you so much. And I think, was that Valeria speaking earlier?
Yes.
That was Susanna.
Oh, Susanna, sorry. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Susanna. And I think I've got next Valeria on my screen, if you want to come in, and then Marjolein.
I think Valeria just asked the question about doulas and midwives.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting really
Yes.
lost in the,
Can you, do you mind putting your hand down, Valeria, unless there's anything else that you want to add, just to eliminate some confusion.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
So I think we got Marjolein. Are you happy to coordinate, Anna? You do a much better job than I do.
Oh, yeah. I'm here to support you and Cassandra.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Anna. But yeah, Marilyn, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, should I go? Yeah, I'm Marjolein Pineapples. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm not a midwife or a professional carer, but I'm a researcher with a biology background and a designer, and I'm very interested in this topic, maternity care and perinatal care. I'm currently starting off a project about the future of it, and I've written down some of the things, but in the meantime, of course, I see a lot of things on the screen as well. And one thing that stands out for me is that I think in the Netherlands, we at the moment still have a very unique system of autonomous midwifery practice and a relatively high level of home births. But like a month ago, there was this decision made to, and I don't know if many of you know it, so that's why I thought I would share it, to sort of align all the perinatal care, so the OBGYNs and the hospitals, with the midwifery care in one sort of, I'm not saying if like financial system, so that the care is more continuous, because they all sort of have to receive the money from the same bag, and they have to sort of, like, all the caregivers have to have more contact with each other to provide good care. Basically, you get this sort of consortium of caregivers surrounding the pregnant woman, pregnant person, ideally, and people make the decision together with the woman which care she would receive. But in practice, this means, because the hospitals are like more centralized and better organized, that they sort of get the decision-making power. They have the infrastructure to facilitate this. And a very real fear here is, of course, that this will be the beginning of the end of autonomous midwifery care in the Netherlands. And I think this is sort of confirmed by everything that I see here, and also the story of Claire, or what she mentioned, that the OBGYN is the entry point in Germany, I think it was. They want to make that the entry point in the Netherlands for pregnant women as well, but now it's still the midwife. So when you get pregnant, you just have your consultations with a midwife, and it's very low key, and only if there's a medical reason to transfer you to like hospital care, you get transferred to an OBGYN. So having said that, I think especially seeing that sort of as one of the last Western strongholds where midwifery care is still big and it seems to be in danger as well, I think that education of professional caregivers, and I mean the midwives and the OBGYNs or the doctors or the obstetric nurses, should be much broader and not just involve medical care, but really all the things that midwives learn their studies, even things that doulas learn when they do their own studies, should be included in the system. So not just, okay, what are medical complications and how to deal with that, but the whole emotional, mental, supportive framework for caregiving that should be an integral part. Like feminist theory should be an integral part of any gynecological study, I think. So that's one hand. And on the other hand, I think that more as a social cultural embedding of birth in the communities is very necessary. Like every time I speak about birth with younger men and women, they really actually think birth is like a Hollywood movie. And that's a problem, because this sort of sets people, you know, back so many steps if they don't know what actual like physiological birth is or can be. So I think that like normalizing birth, not just up to the point that, you know, birthing at home is normal, but that like I had my eldest daughter at my birth, and that's not at my home birth, the second one. And it's not like actually frowned upon, at least not in my circles, but it's definitely not normal practice, or have your sister at your birth. I think those are things that might help seeing birth for, you know, what it really is, instead of something that we make up in our heads. I'm not sure how this like could feed into like midwifery practices and critical midwifery studies, because it's sort of, you know, around midwifery care and not something that, you know, you could take on yourselves. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what you think of these kinds of things. Is it something that the midwifery field can take on by themselves, or do we need like partners or other people doing their work too? Thank you.
Oh, Marilyn, thank you so much. So many thoughts went through my head as you were talking. So in the UK, when midwifery used to be strong, we had something called the Primary Care Trust, which was basically a system of financing and organizing primary care, including community midwifery. And midwives assisting home birth were part of the Primary Care Trust, and all the midwives working in the community used to be called senior midwives. So you could only go out in the community if you had quite a good experience, because you needed to function in an autonomous manner. And this all was dismantled just before I moved to the UK, I think kind of late 90s, early 2000. And this was the beginning of the end, really, because once you put midwifery to compete with acute services and obstetrics, automatically it goes under that hierarchy. And as midwives, we can only lose out of that, unfortunately. So if there was one point of reflection and learning from previous mistakes from other countries, I would really beg you in the Netherlands not to go that way, because what seems a great idea on paper, what you always need to consider is the unintended consequences of creating certain structures. So I don't want to ruin the conclusions from Cassandra and mine, but yes, our reflection is to move in an opposite direction from that.
I'm going through the chat and just sort of trying to bring it all together into a big, I put listening to birthing people really loud because Claire's put that into the chat. But yeah, Anna, go ahead, your hand's up.
Thank you. I've just been, a lot of the people that have raised, made points before me have, I've just kind of been like you, Lucia, just kind of reflecting and just kind of wanted to raise a few points. So one of the things we talked about earlier was power dynamics, and to what extent I think someone mentioned earlier in the session about midwives and obstetricians perhaps in the US being trained together. And I think Donna and Davis talked about being cautious about that. And I often talk about this I wonder, there's obviously power dynamics there. And I just wonder, where are obstetricians in these spaces? Because I feel like just from a service user perspective, and as a doula and kind of listening in on these conversations, that there are some fantastic kind of, I guess, radical doulas out there who's ready to really transform the system, and are really centering women and birthing people. But I feel like as midwives, as kind of being marginalized and on the fringes, that midwives that we kind of have to know their language, and we have to know, but you rarely see them engaging in these conversations. And I think that is just kind of telling of the power dynamics, and you know, do we, you know, is as we're kind of trying to start this, you know, to really galvanize this movement and really transform maternity care for people, do we put our energy into trying to convert people over to this way of thinking? Is that where our energy should be placed, or should we think of things that are outside of it? I guess that's just a question that comes to mind, because you know, that's a lot of our, you know, this work, as we talked about it as an organizing activism perspective, it's a lot of energy. And to put that energy into convincing an institution that will always work in the interest of maintaining its power, is that where our interest should lie? That's one kind of question or reflection. And the other thing is someone, I think from news, I don't even want to say, because I don't want to mix the country up, but someone who spoke earlier about kind of being the restrictions of a birth center and kind of just missing the margin, or kind of being priced out, or kind of being pushed into hospital care. And I'm just wondering, you know, with my daughter, I had a wonderful, well, both of my births were, you know, anyway, don't want to get into that, but I had a wonderful experience having in a birth center, had a beautiful water birth. And that was kind of my next with my son. I was thinking, okay, I'm going to have a home birth. And then having kind of gestational diabetes. And then suddenly it was just ripped out from under me. And the whole time during pregnancy, you know, I felt like, where are, you know, could I not have been seen in a birth center? Could I not have had a home birth? Because I was essentially talked out of it. And I just wonder, you know, are we moving the parameters a bit, make midwifery-led care more inclusive, so to speak? So that's another question. And the last one, I think that the person before talked about birth in the community, and that made me think about, well, what does that look like? How do we normalize pregnancy and normalize birth? So again, with my second pregnancy and birth, it was an opportunity to talk with my daughter and engage with her. She sees me breastfeeding her brother, and she, you know, so it becomes normal. But what does that, when we, you know, when you're creating birth centers and midwifery-led care units, how does that translate into the community? Is it just the presence of the birth center? How are midwives engaging with the community to present this as normal? Because like someone said, it does kind of seem to be this niche. You and your friends, you know, want a home birth and birth centers, and so it's normal to you and your community. But when you step outside your door into the wider community, it's Hollywood movies and lots of pain and very dramatic. So I'm kind of wondering, what does that look like? And I'll stop there because I don't want to take up too much space.
we can stay here until tomorrow to discuss what is right. So Cassandra, shall I have a quick go at the issue around the, you know, where if I understood correctly, Anna, is where is the role of obstetricians in all of this, and should we waste time trying to convert them or not? Am I capturing?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So, well, you know, this is a completely personal perspective based on having worked in many different settings for quite a while. And for me is a total yes, we should invest that time to build bridges and relationships. And the majority of obstetricians, they are not like, you know, evil people trying to do evil stuff, but they are normal people who are, you know, convinced of what they do, very often have been exposed only to high risk and emergencies and the medical industrial stuff. And very simple things such as inviting trainee obstetricians to see a water birth, to spend a day in a birth center, it can have a revolutionary impact on the rest of their career. And I know this because many of them told me that having seen the magic of birth, how it can be, it has influenced them in their choices. So I think it's definitely very important, and it's also important to to think that certainly as a midwife, I have learned from my colleague obstetricians, but in a reciprocal manner, I expect they have learned from me. So role modeling this reciprocity, of learning is crucial when it's done in a non-hierarchical manner. So that's the crucial. And the more senior people, how they role play, how they model this is very important in terms of what impact they have on the more junior staff. So very, very important. The second one about the, if I remember correctly, this not being eligible for a midwifery unit. So again, this is something that is a very hot topic in the UK at the moment, because traditionally we have been, let's say, quite open towards what women preferences were. And in the current climate, which is quite a crazy climate here in the UK, very toxic, we are moving away from there. That, for me as an immigrant to the UK is very strange to observe. And we need to really clarify, go back to basic and understand clinical criteria and clinical recommendation are one thing, but then there is the woman's autonomy, and we as health professionals should be respecting the woman's autonomy and work in partnership to make a plan together in which we provide information based on evidence, and the woman and the birthing person are the one who are making that decision. So as long as there is that two-way conversation, women should be able to opt for what they feel is right for them, because we are not in their shoes, we cannot make those decisions. And the last one, I scribbled there something, I don't remember what I scribbled anymore. Oh yes, about the community. So, if you follow the philosophy of the biopsychosocial, you can really reconceptualize midwifery units, birth centers, as these places where there are loads of activities happening, and women bring in their other children, and there is this way of spreading the opposite of the Hollywood movies. So you see people breastfeeding freely, you see discussions about birth which are based not on fear but on understanding the physiology. So there is magical things happening there in terms of health education. And that's, how it should be. So is a real opportunity to focus on the aspect of the social care and the health generation and creation of salutogenesis, more than the strictly medical and risk factors and everything else. Cassandra, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to these 3 points.
No, I think it's been covered. I'm just aware of time, so I do want other people to sort of weigh in, and it's been just a fantastic chat so far. I was going to check with Anna and Rodante about where we are with that and how much time I think we have left.
So we have, I'm feeling very guilty because I asked very long questions, but there's about 7 minutes left.
Okay.
And I'm aware that we've got Claire, I believe you've asked a question before. I don't know if you had a comment, but I don't think Valentina had a chance to ask, if that's okay. If sorry, Cassandra and Lucia, do you think there's time for one more question and then conclusions, or
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So sorry, Claire, if you want to type your comments in the chat, there'll also be a space after Jenny Joseph's presentation to be able to discuss more. So if you want to save your questions in for anyone with burning questions. So Valentina, take it away.
Yes. Sorry, I don't understand. Should I talk or I wait for later?
Yes, of course. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. It's not a question, actually, it's answering or sharing a little bit more about experience to complementary So I am from Mexico, in the southwest of Mexico. I just want to say that we live in very different contexts, and I live in Chiapas, where we have a lot of traditional midwiferys, still ancestral midwiferys, and very grounded in their community. So it's a very different context where I am hearing you, when you really needs to come back to the community and you come back to the nature of the body and the community and the woman itself. Here I studied anthropology, and I've been working with midwives, but now I become a midwife trained by midwives in a different model, not in a health system model, but with midwives. So I kind of been a traditional midwife. But the thing is that we are in resistance. Mostly many midwives doesn't want to get trained and certificate, because under these lines of the certification, they take them a lot of power and a lot of knowledge. They are all in the health system. There is all the time telling them to don't use their plants, to don't massage, to don't say. They are taking out their power. They certificate them. They are making a lot of divisions in the community. So some midwives are certificate in the same community, and some other midwives are not certificate. So this is bringing a lot of confusion and conflicts in the community. So in the cities, there is a resurgence of the, sorry, my English, of the midwifery. And like Michelle say, is getting only like for people who can pay it, no? So we want to know how can come back to the community in places where the communities are disarticulated. So this is how we learn a lot of on the indigenous communities where I work, how they do it to bring together the community and the focus on the woman. So one propose maybe that we are doing is a collective consultations. So we gathered in a group, in a circle, different pregnant women, where we can talk about our different issues, our difficulties, and emotionally and physically, even social. And then we, with the midwives, we are talking about these different issues that the pregnant women have. And so we get we're making collective this knowledge. We are not doing training like birth training, how I don't know how to say that, but training for how to give birth, but mostly how to empower women in a community. So they share their experiences, and we have women who are starting pregnancies, but other in postpartum. So sharing all these experiences, they make women very, very powerful, very strong with their knowledge. And yes, and this is something that we are proposing in different parts where we felt like the articulation in the community is taking over. And I would like to say many, many things, but my English is so. But other thing that is concerned to us is the transmission of the knowledge that are given woman to woman, midwife to their apprentices out of the health system model. So we are in this construction, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Valentina. You did a great job explaining that. I have to acknowledge that this is a space where people are from different contexts and speaking in English as a second language. And, you know, we have to acknowledge that, yeah, you have done that beautifully. And thank you for people who are making that extra effort and energy to speak in a language that's not your own and to listen to this in a language that's not your own. So I acknowledge that it is extra, it is work as well. So thank you. Pass over to Cassandra and Lucia.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Just been, sorry, go ahead, Lucia. You go
I
first.
was wondering if you wanted to wrap up briefly what you have on the whiteboard. And then
I've got a lot.
We could come back to this we could come back to this after Jenny's talk, if you'd like.
Yeah.
If you want to stick around, this could be a great point to talk more
Yeah.
about. If I understand you might not have time to stick around, but even people in the group might want to
Yeah.
add to it.
I'm gonna export it right now to
Exactly, I was going
PDF.
to say that, so we don't lose it. That's great.
Okay.
I was gonna say also that, you know, maybe we should add we had the slide about our little reflections, but, you know, a lot of the stuff that we were thinking about, you know, were very similar. You know, we had also thinking about, this had to decentralize, and, you know, for at least from me on my end, you know, decentralizing and, you know, removing that hierarchy in care. I know someone has mentioned about a chief midwife, and obviously, I think for the UK context, you know, where there is such a strong hierarchy, you know, is having a chief midwife just really, you know, reinforcing that hierarchy of care even further. You know, so thinking about, you know, ways to dismantle that. And I think a lot of that is, what you were talking about, Valentina, the sort of focusing on the transmission of different types of knowledge is really important. And then obviously, you know, centering a woman or birthing person within the choice, you know, really making it actually their choice. You know, that would take, I think, in my opinion, something that's very non-hierarchical in terms of knowledge, in terms of how, what knowledge is important within care. As well, we also talked about continuity of care as perhaps a way of within the system. This is our dream, at least, would be to have continuity of care. And then Lucia, I know you had a couple of ideas too as well, so I'll let you wrap up with those.
Yeah. Well, I think my one is quite simple. I have been kind of you know, using the method of trial and mistake and various different options. And where I'm now standing, based on quite a bit of the research we've done in trying to implement and scale up midwifery units across Europe. Definitely I can just speak for England, for example, but definitely also for other European countries, the concept of creating a primary midwifery care budget, a little bit what you have in the Netherlands, but still more integrated and connected with the acute settings. But by kind of separating how midwives are employed under a different budget for providing the all the community setting care and birth, including also we have a lot of alongside midwifery units, which means midwifery units sitting within the hospital. And one of the main issues there is that being that it would consider the center of everything, midwives get pulled, and then the birth center left unstaffed. And then we are told we don't have enough midwifery unit birth. So if the team working in a midwifery unit was more linked to the community and having a small core staff and midwives coming in with their, you know, the women accompanying them, and not being, you know, the labor not being able to pool these midwives, that would provide a system which would, in a way, counteract that centralization of the labor ward, and also provide more unity and collaboration within these primary care midwives. It is nothing like revolutionary or new. We are seeing how in some countries works with perhaps coexisting other issues. So would be amazing really to learn from the various systems and countries what works well and what doesn't work so well, which some research is attempting to do, to really come up with this ideal model really. And that's why we love so much hearing and hearing from other countries what happens and what the midwife does, etc. I don't know, Cassandra, if there was anything else. I'm going back to the chat to see if there was any relevant comment. So I'm just reading from my line.
If it's all right, Lucia,
Yeah.
if you could pick up with, I just want to be aware of everyone's, be respectful of everyone's time, and I'm not assuming that you and Cassandra will be able to come back in an hour, but if you are able to, or at least if you could share the whiteboard, then we can bring this up for discussion later on, if that's okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Cassandra, if you don't mind sharing 1 second, the last slide again. It was just an invitation for anyone interested in our Global Maternal Health Masters to have a look at it, as well as the Midwifery Unit Network website. We will give you the slides, Anna, so those can be shared if anyone wants. But we have a fantastic masters that is next slide, I think. If you basically go on Google and you put City University of London, Global Maternal Health MSc, you get information about this masters. We have students from all around the world. It's mostly online and is evaluated amazingly well by our first cohort of students. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
And we will take us
I come back in an hour. So yeah, we'll see you, and looking forward to the rest of the evening.